Have you ever stood outside at night, glanced up at the stars, and considered just how tiny we are in the vastness of the cosmos? We're one of 8 planets in a solar system revolving around a sun that's 100 million miles away. Our sun and solar system is one of 1,000 million stars and solar systems that make up our galaxy, the Milky Way. And our galaxy is simply one of 2 trillion galaxies that we know of that make up our universe. And who knows what lies beyond our universe. So it stands to reason that somewhere out there in the vastness of space, there's other intelligent life. Ever since H.G. Wells wrote about Martians invading our world in 1898, writers and artists have been fascinated with stories of beings from other worlds. And these days, it's one of the most popular subgenres of horror. Perhaps this is because, unlike other monsters like zombies or vampires or werewolves, which have very specific rules, aliens can be literally anything. After all, the word alien simply means a foreign being from another place.
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet.
By definition, aliens are the ultimate others, completely different to us and our way of life.
He's lucky, I'm lucky, we're all lucky!
So naturally, the horror genre has thrived on telling stories of outsiders and otherness using aliens for the best part of a century.
The most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater.
This series, we're going to be taking a look at the history and evolution of alien and cosmic horror. From the boom of 50s alien invasion movies in America,
The flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars,
to the wave of 60s sci-fi horror in Britain.
It was what I was afraid of. The thing got a huge intake of energy. The very substance of it seemed to be coming alive.
To some of the scariest ever alien movies in the 70s. All the way through to some of the recent horror blockbusters of the 21st century.
Go, 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 go!
We'll be looking at the different types of alien beings in horror cinema, from traditional Martian invaders to body-snatching pod people.
Where do they come from? I don't know.
To Lovecraftian godlike creatures beyond our comprehension.
You want to know what it is that runs all this? You go find it.
Finally, we'll be looking at why, despite its B-movie reputation, alien horror remains one of the most prolific and popular subgenres in all of horror. Join me as we begin our journey through the cosmos and explore the evolution of alien horror. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. It's been a while. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. If you check out our back catalogue, you'll see 6 whole seasons of this podcast that focus on different subgenres: slashers, ghosts, folk horror, zombies, occult, and mind and body horror. But this week we're kicking off our 7th season as that intro suggested, focusing on alien, sci-fi, and cosmic horror. Cannot wait. I'm so excited. We've got some incredible films to discuss with some absolutely incredible guests. From next week onwards, we'll be beginning our deep dive discussions, but as ever, this week, part 1 is going to work as a little introduction. We're not going to be spoiling anything this week. We're going to be giving you a little overview, a little whistle-stop tour of the subgenre. Later on in this episode, I'm going to be joined by Freudian cinephile Mary Wilde to hear her take on alien movies. But first of all, let's get into the history of aliens in horror. Joining me for this introduction, well, it wouldn't be an introduction episode without this guy, the walking and talking encyclopedia of fantastic film and television. Welcome back to the podcast, Kevin Lyons. Hello.
Hello, Mike. How are you? Good to be back again.
Very good, thanks. It's lovely to be back. It's probably been about a year since we last spoke, and I remember us that was early stage of lockdown, wasn't it? And we sort of thought, oh, I wonder how long this will last. Will it be a few weeks, a few months? Who knows? Yeah. Here we still are. Still
locked down. But then, as a man who's been an habitual loner and hoarder for the whole of his life, to be honest, I haven't even noticed there has been a lockdown. I mean, to me, it's just been as normal. So.
Exactly. But actually, there is a little light, isn't there, at the end of the tunnel? We are easing out of lockdown. We are, fingers crossed, returning to normal life. And I think actually what better time to move from sort of concentrating on the horrors of internal states to the horror of the external world, to the great unknown, to the outside, to the cosmos. So, Kev, let me ask you, this subgenre, alien, sci-fi, cosmic horror, that kind of thing, am I right in thinking this is one of your absolute favourites?
Yeah. Science fiction has been a big deal for me. For the whole of my life. I didn't have any choice in being a science fiction fan. I was born in 1962. And so that by the time I was 8, we'd put men on the moon and got them back safely.
Amazing.
We'd had Concorde. We'd had all sorts of amazing technological advances. On television, we had Jerry Anderson blowing things up with the most amazing explosions ever seen on television. I mean, brilliant stuff. For a kid, that was the best thing ever. There was some little program called Dr. Something, Dr. What, Dr. Why. I don't know what happened to that, but that was a big obsession in childhood, in my teenage years, in my early 20s, and now in my 50s. It's still a major obsession. So science fiction has always been there for me, and it's always been, I don't know, just something I've absolutely adored since I could first start to read, really.
It's so exciting, isn't it? I think that the stories that have lots of ideas, I suppose, and I think sci-fi, particularly as a genre, has changed a bit, hasn't it? And I think, I always look at the Star Trek films, for example, and, when you look at the Star Trek films now, and they're much more kind of like big explosions and action. Compared to what Star Trek kind of used to be, which was a little bit more ideas-based, wasn't it? But I love that kind of sci-fi, to be honest, the kind of high-concept ideas stuff,
That's the great thing about science fiction. It can be anything you want it to be. It could be pulp fiction. It could be like, with one bound who's on the other side of the galaxy type fiction. It could be the sort of weirder, more introspective stuff of the new wave of the 1960s. It could be cyberpunk. It could be whatever you want it to be. And it's always one of those things that people say, oh, I don't like science fiction. And I always say, well, which science fiction don't you like? There's so much of it. There's so many different subgenres. Which one is it you don't like? Because I bet you do like it. You just don't realise it.
Totally, exactly. It's just like horror, right? It's just as broad and varied, just as interesting. So specifically, I suppose we're talking about a particular type of sci-fi. Obviously, the scary stuff is what we're focusing on.
Of course.
What is it about space, I suppose, that is so frightening to us and works so well in the horror genre, do you think?
I think it's because, when you think about a vampire or a zombie, you're never going to meet a vampire or a zombie. They're always going to be on film and on television, but you're never actually going to meet one.
Yes.
But you could go outside tonight, if it's a nice, clear night, lie down in your back garden or on your balcony and look up, and there's just infinity hovering over your head. And it's just we don't know what's there. We've made so many advances, but honestly, we have absolutely no idea what's out there. No. And that, I think, plays subconsciously, at least, on our minds. What's up there in all that black? I mean, what? It's just sort of hovering over our heads every night, and it's quite a terrifying idea that I'm not sure what's scariest, that there's nothing there, Or there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. You're so right, though. You are so right about that, because there's something about the horror of nothingness.
Yeah.
That's something we're going to tap into a lot, particularly when we talk about the kind of the more cosmic side of this subgenre. The horror of the vast, open unknown, that we on planet Earth are like this little dot that have somehow, prevailed in this vast universe that kind of hurts your brain to think about it, right? And that's kind of terrifying.
Well, that's the other thing, you look at films like, 2001 or Gravity, which have got no monsters in them, but they're still actually really scary films because they've got these people in an environment that we have no right to be in.
Yes.
We shouldn't be there. And even without the monsters, it's bloody scary.
It is.
It really is, yeah.
It is. Yeah. And, aliens are... they're always going to be scary, and like you say, you'll never know for sure. I guess chances are, the probability is that there is other life out there somewhere, right? I think
I'm convinced of that. I mean, again, go and look out at the night sky tonight if you're not living in central London like I am, where you see nothing but the moon. But go and have a look, and every one of those little white dots that you see is a star around which there are planets, and then come back and tell me there's not life out there. I don't think they're coming down here in flying saucers and abducting rednecks from the middle of nowhere. I don't believe all that stuff. But the idea that there isn't life, I mean, it's an incredibly arrogant point of view, isn't it, that we're all there is?
Yeah.
What absolute nonsense, It's just
so true.
It doesn't make any sense at all. That frightens me more than anything else, I think, the idea that people think that we may be the only thing there is. Well, no, it doesn't make
yes, that we are somehow the centre of the universe. Exactly, yeah.
Please, God help us if we are.
No, exactly. It's true. Do you think, and we'll get into this obviously in more depth, but, do you think that as with so many subgenres, the sort of alien space sci-fi horror has sort of changed over the years in what it means, in what it represents, in how it kind of reflects us and that kind of thing? Is it as a subgenre that's constantly shifted and evolved?
Yeah, definitely. The best science fiction for me has always been allegorical. I love the pulp stuff. I love all that stuff. But the best, the really good stuff, is science fiction writers looking around them and thinking, this is the state of the world. How can I get that message across without alienating, for want of a better word, too many people? And, you look at something like 1984, which famously is about 1948. He just set it in the future. And aliens have always been a fantastic allegorical device. When you look at the first and still one of the best alien invasion stories, when we go back to War of the Worlds, that is very much written by a left-leaning writer who didn't like the way British colonialism was going, and so wrote a story. How would it feel if smug middle-class Britain was suddenly confronted with a greater power, just like smug middle-class Britain had been to other countries?
Yes,
and that's exactly what that story is about. That's about him saying, look, this could happen to us. And he wasn't going to be able to say, okay, so it's the French coming over or it's the Russians coming or whatever, because that wouldn't have gone down well. So he just made the bad guys aliens from Mars. And that brilliant bit of sort of political allegorical writing, which turned out to be one of the greatest novels ever written.
Absolutely, and I think when we hear the word alien, we specifically have a vision in mind, probably of the xenomorph, right? Probably of that alien, I expect. Yeah. But there is, if you actually just look up the dictionary definition of alien, I mean, it's like you were just saying, Kev. I mean, the strict term alien, it could mean anyone from an unfamiliar place, right? Belonging to a foreign place, culture, someone who's an outsider, someone who is not a naturalized citizen of the place that he or she lives. So it's actually very broad, isn't it? That's the thing. It
is. And, people have used science fiction as well, and aliens in science fiction, as a kind of positive thing to sort of represent the dispossessed and the outsider and the outcast. We're asked to side with the alien. And that's why science fiction is so marvellous, that you can do all these things in such a sort of what's seen as a very sort of down-market genre.
Yes.
You actually look at it, just look at it with open eyes, and honestly, you'll find some amazing stuff. I get all quite evangelical when it comes to science fiction.
No, I love it, and I agree with you, and we'll get into this a bit more, but I think it also... to me, it does have a bit of a mixed reputation, doesn't it? I think that a lot of people, when we talked about ghosts, for example, ghosts always feels like the sort of the respectable subgenre of horror, right? There's something about aliens, I think, that make people maybe immediately think B movies. I wonder if they think Plan 9 from Outer Space, The Blob, things like that.
Yes, that's exactly what. But then, you look at popular culture now, and sorry guys, but we won. The nerds won. Science fiction is now the dominant genre in popular culture. Yeah. It's not maybe the science fiction I grew up with, but that's okay because I'm an old bloke and it's not meant to be. It's meant to have moved on. It's meant to have changed, and that's absolutely fine. But it's been a sort of underlying force throughout popular culture for decades, and now all of a sudden, while we weren't looking, we won. The nerds have won. We've taken over. We're in charge now.
Well, I guess also, outside of horror, look at the biggest movie of all time, right? Star Wars as well. And, I guess, and I know there are some sci-fi people that would also kind of deny that being sci-fi, right? As well, that it's a kind of Western or an adventure movie or whatever. You've got your hand up, Kev. Are you one of those people?
This is another one of those Dawn of the Dead situations, isn't it? I'm a bit of a Star Wars skeptic, I'm afraid.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
It's not my idea of science. My favourite film of all time, and this will either have people switching off or going, yes, well done, Kev. Favourite film of all time ever is 2001: Space Odyssey.
Right, very
That's
much
my
a different
idea
type
of science fiction.
Sci-fi.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like my science fiction to make me think about things. But then again, like I said, when I was a kid, Jerry Anderson blowing stuff up, that was all I wanted.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to knock Star Wars or its fans because I was exactly the same, but just with a different, sort of fictional universe, as it were, back then.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And these days, everyone's obsessed, all the kids now love Marvel films and that kind of thing.
Absolutely,
and I guess there's a certain element of sci-fi. Even the last Avengers film was all about time travel and stuff, so there's a lot
all
of that
them,
in there.
Yeah, all of them. You've got scientifically created super soldiers, you've got gamma ray monsters, you've got all sorts of great stuff in the Marvel film. They are science fiction, yeah, definitely.
There's another sort of element to sort of alien horror that I'm going to explore as well, which is, I guess a lot of people might class it as kind of Lovecraftian or cosmic horror. Not necessarily aliens from other planets, but maybe just from kind of other worlds, other dimensions, that kind of thing. And there's some really interesting stories to be told there, aren't there, I think?
Oh, there are, yeah. And Lovecraft's an interesting guy in the sense that he's kind of on this borderline between what I would regard as science fiction and what I would regard as cosmic horror. And I think they're two related but different things. And with Lovecraft, his aliens, they don't arrive in fleets of flying saucers.
Yeah.
They've always been here. And there's, I think it's more to do with the recognition of these things, rather than the sudden shock that, oh my God, there's a fleet of flying saucers, we're not alone in the universe.
Yes.
I think with Lovecraft, the horror comes from this realisation that actually they've been here all the time.
Yeah.
And they've been sort of shaping what we're doing. And you find some really great science fiction based on those ideas. I mean, Nigel Neal was very good at that.
Yes.
The whole Quatermass and the Pit thing, that these things had shaped us from our very beginnings. Arthur C. Clarke, who, is a great sort of archetypal hard science fiction writer. In Childhood's End, he has the human race being terrified of the devil, but the devil turns out to have been a race of aliens who were here before. Just as in 2001, that they've been manipulating us the whole time. So there's this kind of little grey area where cosmic horror and science fiction sort of cross over. But I think with Lovecraft, I think it's more mystical than science.
Exactly, because I think actually you're so right, because cosmic horror, they're not really interested in the science part of the fiction, right? I mean, they are obviously they're set in space often, or they're about spaceships or whatever, but like you say, they're more mystical. Science fiction is so much more interested in the how and the why. Cosmic horror is the opposite, right? It's all about how we can't understand the how and the why. It's monsters or it's worlds that are incomprehensible to us, that are just beyond our reach, beyond beyond our capabilities of understanding, and that is what makes them scary. And some of the best movies that do that, that we're going to be discussing this series, are From Beyond or Event Horizon or The Endless or whatever. These are fantastic movies that are, I suppose, what I would consider sort of classic cosmic horror.
Yes, they're aliens, but no, they're not coming in flying saucers. No, they're not here to destroy us necessarily. They may want us to worship them. They may want all sorts of things. So really interesting little sort of juxtaposition between these two strands of alien horror.
Absolutely. So I might come back to some of these topics again, but let me take us back to the beginning. I mean, how far back does sort of the idea of alien invasion stories in horror, how far back does that go sort of in literature or whatever else?
Well, it goes back a little bit further, I think, than most people might suspect. Now, when you first contacted me with your list of films you're going to do, one of the things you said was, why were there no alien invasion films before like the 1950s? And in my typical arrogant way, I thought, I'll show him. I'll bloody show him. I'll find loads of them.
I baited you there, didn't I?
You did. You know me too well, Mr. Munster. You know me far too well. The thing is, you're absolutely right. In terms of alien invasions, prior to the 1950s, certainly in cinema, they just didn't happen. What we got other things which were sort of serving the same function as that. Particularly in Britain, around sort of 1910, 1912, that sort of era, we had this whole glut of films about Britain being invaded by foreign powers.
Right.
We all kind of knew, I say we all knew, I'm not that old, but people at the time knew that these alien invaders were all Germans. Because, that's what they were worried about. But they never came out and quite said so. You had films like England Invaded, A Tunnel Under the North Sea, things like that. These were science fiction concepts, but they weren't outer space aliens. They were, as you said earlier, they were the other type of aliens, these people that are sort of not us, Johnny Foreigner coming to take our women and steal our sheep and all the rest of it. And that's what it was. It was this sort of paranoia, and that paranoia is exactly the same kind of paranoia that informed the 1950s American science fiction invasion movies. But earlier there had been books on this subject. Go back to 1894. And there's a book called The Great War in England in 1897. So set just in the future. Again, it was about an invasion, not an alien invasion, but it served the same function. The Invasion of 1910, these were both by a guy called William Le Queux. And Saki, he wrote a book in 1913 called When William Came, again about Britain being overrun and invaded. And that really is what War of the Worlds was about as well. It was about us being an imperial power, but it was also about our fear of the other, of the outsider coming to get us. And we didn't like that at all,
So War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, 1898. Again, there's probably, I don't know if this is the case, but is this one of the first actual kind of alien invasion stories?
Yes, there was, as far as I can tell, there was one book that preceded it, immediately preceded it, came out earlier that same year. It was a German novel by a guy called Kurt Laswitz called Auf zwei Planeten, or from two planets, or of two planets.
Yeah.
But of course it was in German, it wasn't translated to one. It was translated eventually, I think, in 1971, so it was a long time coming. So an English language novel was always going to be the more widely read. And War of the Worlds was the first time that we'd seen anything, an alien invasion on that scale in literature.
Relatively modern, right? I mean, we've talked together about how ghost stories kind of go all the way back to sort of cave people or whatever,
right.
and there's something about and a cult obviously goes back, centuries and centuries as well. There's something about this that actually does still feel very recent in a way, doesn't it? That this was one of the first major stories to do that. Yeah,
and I think the reason for that is that, I mean, technology obviously was a big deal.
Yeah.
The idea that you could travel from one planet to another wasn't really even a consideration until around that time. And also the fact that there was a huge upswing in interest in the planet Mars. It had become a big deal at the time. So it was the novel that was waiting to be written.
Yes.
And had there not been the interest in Mars, I wonder if maybe Wells would have written it as an invasion from Germans. I don't know.
Interesting.
But,
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean, it changed the way we saw science fiction. It didn't really invent science fiction. There are people before Wells that can lay claim to that. But it certainly invented science fiction as we know it today.
It's really interesting. So, I mean, that kind of leads me on to my next incredibly broad question, which was, how important is H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds to pop culture, I suppose, you know?
It's vital. Absolutely vital. It was, like I say, it shaped science fiction for decades to come. I mean, how many times have we seen films or read books in which there are mass invasions? I mean, right up to the modern day. You know, they're still making films about mass invasions of aliens, and they all owe something to H.G. Wells. And it is one of my favourite books of all time. So I get a little bit evangelical about it, but I think it is supremely important to this genre. You know, without it, I wonder what science fiction might have looked like.
It's amazing, isn't it? Next week, I'm going to be looking at it more in depth with Kim Newman, actually. But what an incredible series of, a legacy in terms of even looking at its adaptations, right? From the Orson Welles play to the 50s film to the Spielberg to the Jeff Wayne album to all of the, incarnate, like the amount of kind of media and that it's kind of spread to, and the amount of ideas that it's inspired, it's really
indeed, and you mentioned the album, a little bit like Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights. I have met people who've said, they've made a book out of that record. And it's like, how do I break this to them? It's like, a lot of people came to War of the Worlds because of that album.
It's
a
amazing.
Brilliant album. I absolutely love it. But
I was going to ask you, it's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. Something like 1 in 10 people in the world own it. Did you own it, Kev?
Oh, multiple times. I've got it on so many different formats. It's a bit prog rock and it's science fiction. I mean, two of my big passions in life. But why would I not have had it? It's a marvelous adaptation.
It's incredible, isn't it? And also, how unbelievably influential is that Orson Welles radio play as well? I mean,
absolutely.
Kind of the first. And again, we're going to talk about this in depth next week, but kind of the first found footage almost or something, isn't it?
Absolutely, I mean, it's a brilliant conceit to have this live outside broadcast of the invasion actually happening. So yes, found footage, but in audio form. And there's a really great, if you can find it, it's very hard to come across these days, a really great television film called The Night That Panicked America, which is a fictionalised account of what happened. And sure, it will have exaggerated some stuff, of course it will, but it showed the impact that had on people who'd come to the broadcast without hearing the opening titles and thinking it was actually happening, thinking that Martians had actually arrived and this was it was the end of the world. Oh,
it's incredible, isn't it? It's very Stephen Volk Ghost Watch,
it is absolutely. It's a precursor of all of those things. Yeah.
I love it. So you mentioned Mars. What is it specifically about Mars? I mean, like, it's got to be the most popular planet to write about, right? In terms of aliens, the danger, the threat of Mars. It's really interesting, that.
Well, I think there's two main reasons for this. The prosaic one is that it's the nearest planet. It's our next door neighbour. We can see it with the naked eye. We've been able to see it with the naked eye for centuries. People have been aware of it. And so if there was going to be life anywhere in the universe, let's be honest, back then we didn't know that the universe was as big as it is, and it's probably even bigger than we think it is now. They're always finding new things about it. But if there was going to be life anywhere, it was going to be on Mars. And if there were people on Mars, they were probably up to no good. They had to be up to no good, weren't they? I mean, come on, this was the ultimate Johnny Foreigner, wasn't it? I mean, not only is he from another country, he's from another planet. He must be up to no good. He must be up to something. And so it was our nearest neighbour. It was feasible for people to get their heads around the idea that people could travel to and from Mars. And particularly in the sort of late 19th century, mid to late 19th century, there was this sort of real surge in interest in the planet, particularly after 1877, when Giovanni Schiaparelli, I do hope I pronounced that right, he was the guy who found what became known as the canals on Mars. In fact, it was a misunderstanding. He said there were channels on the surface, and
Right.
that, because he was Italian, that got translated as canals. As soon as there were canals, there must have been intelligent life, and suddenly off it went. Turns out later it was all an optical illusion. He hadn't seen canals or channels or anything like that on Mars. It was just an optical illusion. The technology they were using back then wasn't as good as we have it now. But as early as 1894, they used spectroscopic analysis and found that there was no water or oxygen in the atmosphere of Mars. But that didn't stop people. People still believed that there was life on Mars, and that if there was life on Mars, it had to be malignant. It had to be out to get us. So
really
that was the first thing. That it was so close. It was so near to us. The other one, of course, is it's the red planet.
It's red, right? It's so evocative, isn't it? Yeah.
It's evocative, and particularly in the 1950s in America, red meant one thing and one thing only. It was those damn commies, and they were on Mars. And so it became, it wasn't subtle as propaganda went.
Mars is Russia, basically, right?
Exactly. We had angry red planets and films like that, when it was just whatever was there was counter to the American way of life. And it was going to come and destroy that. And so, again, it was used as an allegory, as a metaphor. And, it was perfect, wasn't it? So the red planet, they must be communists. So perfect, absolutely perfect for their purposes.
It is. You can see that it would be great for, it is very evocative. Even now, I mean, there was something on the news recently where we sent a probe or something to Mars, wasn't there? And there's footage of it, and it is incredibly striking. Like, it's so different to our own planet that's very green and blue. This like stark red landscapes, like you said, no oxygen, no water. It is everything that we're not, right, as well.
Absolutely.
And that's interesting.
It's kind of beautiful in a desolate sort of way. That might be the old romantic in me who's always loved astronomy and always loved science fiction. But I do sort of watch that footage coming back from Mars with a little bit of moisture in my eyes, I must admit. I'm a little bit overcome by it all. Seeing a helicopter, the little drone thing, take off and fly. It only flew a few feet, but we've flown a helicopter on an alien planet. I mean, oh man,
it's amazing, isn't it?
And to think that all of this has happened in my lifetime. Yeah. When I was born, we just about got men into orbit going around the planet. Now we've got spaceships that have gone out of our solar system and heading to God knows where. This has all happened in such a rush. No wonder science fiction has taken off the way it has. We've lived in a science fiction world for the last 50 years.
Would you, given the chance, ever want to go to space, Kev? Would you go on a commercial flight to Mars or the Moon or somewhere like that?
In a heartbeat.
Really? Yeah.
I am, as people who know me or have seen me will know, I am somewhat overweight. I don't think they'd get the spaceships off the ground if they put me in one of them, to be honest. But yes, if there was a way that they could sort of have extra rocket boost, I would go in a heartbeat. I mean, God, to be not necessarily the first, but to be someone, to go and stand on a bit of ground that so few people have stood on.
Yeah.
And, to be on an alien planet, oh, my God, yes, please. Yes, please. Sign me up straight away. Sort of get that put the extra booster on the outside of the rocket. I'm going. Yes, that's brilliant.
Oh, you're braver than I am. I don't know if I would, to be honest. I just keep thinking, oh my God, I wouldn't survive a day. Probably, something would happen to me.
Again, as I said earlier, I'm a little bit of a loner. I said to you before, I'm a bit of a loner. Getting through lockdown and everything. I think I'd be quite all right, like in The Martian. I'd be all right. I wouldn't want to come back. I'll be all right. If I've got my DVDs and I've got some music and I've got my guitar, leave me alone. I'm all right.
Yeah,
I'll just
having a lovely time.
Yeah. You can all sod off. I'm having a great time.
But I think, generally that's it. The idea of Mars as being so different. And I think this is something that, kind of is what connects everything we're going to cover this series, from the kind of more sci-fi based stuff to cosmic stuff, is that it is all about stuff that is completely anti what we're about, right? It is, obviously, to use the obvious word, it is completely alien to us. These things that we just could not get our heads around that are so different to human beings.
This could be the beginning of the end for the human race. For what men first thought were meteors or the often ridiculed flying saucers are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Movies about aliens really did suddenly boom, particularly in America, particularly in the 1950s, right? We've touched on it already, but what was the cause of this? What was this sudden interest in, UFOs, flying saucers, outer space, all of that in the 50s?
Well, the obvious one is the Cold War. You know, the Cold War was either hotting up or getting colder, whichever way you want to look at it. People were terrified. You know, we'd just come out of a world war which had culminated in the development of the most destructive weapons we've ever known. And in the sort of 5 years or so since the war, those weapons had proliferated and they turned up in the hands of the enemy. You know, whichever side you were on, the enemy had got them as well. So suddenly we were facing the prospect of total obliteration, like we'd never done before. And so it was like a safety valve almost, these films, you know, sort of saying, yeah, we've got bigger things to worry about. Yes, the Russians might have missiles pointed at us, but look, these guys from Mars are coming to get us. So relax, we can deal with them. We can deal with the Russians when they come. And, you know, so there was that kind of element to it, I think. And, you know, in 1947, June 1947, there was a guy called Kenneth Arnold he was flying his plane and he'd seen some flying objects, which he described as like saucers. And so flying saucer entered the public knowledge, and all of a sudden people were seeing UFOs everywhere. Flying saucers were I mean, you go and buy any book. In the wake of Close Encounters, there were hundreds of books published on UFOs. I bought them all. I bought every single one of them, and they were full of pictures of, you know, supposed flying saucers and UFOs, which were quite clearly hubcaps. You could even see the string on some of them, you know. But they were fascinating, and they really gripped the mind of the American public.
We were walking along, and all of a sudden we looked up, and there was an object. It seemed to come out of nowhere. And of course, we were scared, and we ducked down in some tall grass behind a fence line. It was football shaped. It had red lights.
I don't know whether it was because there was slowly sort of the older religions were slipping away, so we wanted something new to believe in. You know, I think there's an innate need in all human beings to just believe in something.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what it is. That's why we get conspiracy theories and all that sort of stuff, that people just want to believe something. They want something that they can't touch and there's no evidence for. They just want to be able to say, I believe. And UFOs, I think, were a little bit like that. They became almost like a religion in the 1950s and 60s, that people believed wholeheartedly that these were, you know, sort of ships from another planet that were coming down here to do whatever it was they were going to do. I never quite understood it. I mean, I got fascinated with the whole subject for a while, but then you start thinking, well, why did they come all this way? They've come a long way, clearly. You know, they haven't just popped in from next door. They've come from a very long way. And the first thing they do is they land in a forest somewhere and kidnap the most socially inadequate person they can find who no one's ever going to believe. Why
probe them,
Yeah, why? And what was the fixation with probing? I mean, you know, this race of perverts that were coming down and just abducting people and sort of doing horrible things. It made no sense to me whatsoever. They're fun things to believe in, and I love watching the films about them, but yeah, to think about it for a second, it doesn't really make sense, does it?
It's so fun. It's so true. You associate it with those kind of like cults of nutters that wear tinfoil hats and stuff, don't you?
Yes, and of course one day we'll all be surprised, and I'll be the first one to eat my hat, and I'll be the first one out there welcoming them, that there will be a huge, great sort of, you know, Independence Day spaceship hovering over London, and I'll be proved horribly wrong. But it's to be honest, I think, there are aliens out there. Yes, we will meet them one day, but it's going to be through radio. It's not going to be through, you know, huge, great fleets of ships arriving here. It'll be a radio signal that we'll detect from somewhere, you know, and everybody will go, oh, is that it? You know, because all these films primed us to the idea that aliens would turn up in person. And, you know, I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a lovely thing to watch on screen.
And you're right, I imagine, as well, about it kind of almost giving the American people hope, because they do all have a certain kind of patriotic, you know, even War of the Worlds 50s version, they're very like, well, America will win, right? They'll beat the aliens and everyone will live happily ever after. Most of these, at least.
And of course, at the end of the 1953 War of the Worlds, it's in a church.
Yes, it suddenly gets very religious,
which is something that Wells would have hated with a passion. He would have really, really hated that. But yes, you're right. I mean, the American science fiction has often been very optimistic. It's often about, you know, sort of a very rosy future. Horrible things might happen in it, but in the end we will prevail. I think, they had all these aliens coming to Earth and we were going to beat them.
Yeah.
We would destroy them. And because we could destroy them, we could stand up to the Russians or the Chinese or the Europeans or whoever else was coming to get us. And so I think, as a kind of propaganda tool,
yes,
it was quite useful.
It's one of those things that both kind of gives us hope and dread, and this links to cosmic horror as well, doesn't it? These films that are ultimately saying, well, actually, our problems are very, very small because there's much bigger things out there, Yeah.
Again, I keep saying go and have a look at the night sky tonight and then try and imagine your place in that.
Yes.
All of a sudden, all your arrogance or your ego is suddenly utterly on those times where I do get quite egotistical and a bit sort of it's really nice to just look up at the night sky and think, actually, I'm not even a grain of dust. I'm smaller than that, against the cosmic scheme of things,
Absolutely. Actually, one of my personal favourites has much more of a downer ending. It and its remake, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right?
Yes.
From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spreads. As the unimaginable becomes real, the impossible becomes true.
Stop and listen! Stop and listen to me! Listen! Listen! Listen to me! They're not human! Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
Well, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, of course, would have been even more of a downer.
Yes.
Because when they originally shot it, they didn't have the framing sequence.
Right, yeah.
And, the framing sequence, spoiler alert, stick your fingers in your ears if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, you're in the wrong place. Yeah. You really should have seen it by now, trust me. But in the sort of released version, the Kevin McCarthy character, Bennell, he alerts the authorities to the presence of these invading pod people who've come to Earth and have taken away our personalities, which was another great theme of science fiction, this loss of personalities, loss of identity.
Yeah.
And he sort of convinces the authorities with alarming speed, I have to say. They buy this story reading a little bit too quickly. It originally ended with a famous shot of him right up against the camera screaming, you're next. They're here, you're next, And that's how it was meant to end. And that was one of those great exceptions that proves the rule, that they weren't always optimistic. Sometimes they were a real bummer.
That's it. But there were just so many of them, weren't there? The 1950s, off the back of the success of movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, War of the Worlds, like we've said, there was just this boom of UFO alien invasion movies. And, they varied in quality, didn't they, Kev? But are you sort of a fan of that era of the 1950s kind of alien invasion movies in general?
I am. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that came out in that period, and a lot of it wasn't very good.
There's a lot of naff stuff, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, for every War of the Worlds, you've got an invasion of the Neptune men, that and it's like, so there was a lot of crap around, but when it was good, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, absolutely unbeatable, still terrifying to this day.
Yeah.
War of the Worlds, I'm a fan of the book, and it's not like the book, but I think what it does brilliantly well.
Yeah.
As an adaptation of the book, it's hopeless. As a film in its own right, fantastic, absolutely brilliant. The Day the Earth Stood Still. Magnificent film. So there was a lot of really good stuff around in the 1950s, and sort of get through the dross and you'll find some real gems that still work to this day.
And you've got, I think there are some now that are like, they have that kind of cult charm, don't they? Like Plan 9 from Outer Space, for example. And
I will not hear a bad word said against Plan 9 from Outer Space. I know deep in my heart of hearts it's absolute crap. And I tell you what, I'd go and watch that this afternoon over any other science fiction film. I love it.
Absolutely.
It's a great film. It's made with real passion.
That's what it is, isn't it? It's the love that's gone into it.
It's the love of it. It's not made very well with passion, but it's made with passion, and that's really all you can ask for. It's a fantastic film. Go and watch it. It's wonderful.
Let me move on to what I reckon is one of your favourite eras, right? Which is the sort of late 50s into early 60s, particularly British stuff going on here. So, Quatermass.
3 men went into outer space. Only one of them came back a strange, distorted creature, haunted and possessed by something beyond human understanding. What was the terrible secret he could not tell them?
There's a whole new world out there, a wilderness, uncharted. And he's been there and come back. He's got the map.
Who's Quatermass, Kev?
Oh, yes, Professor Bernard Quatermass.
Yeah.
Invented, is that the right word? Created by the great Nigel Neal.
Yeah.
Originally for BBC.
Yes.
And he did 2 television series. There was the Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2. And later, Quatermass in the Pit, rather, there were 3 originally.
That's
then he did a 4th one later on. I'll come to that in a second. But the first 3 were, there's these stories that go around that the streets emptied when Quatermass Experiment was on TV. Yeah. I'm not sure I buy that, because when you look at how many televisions there were in Britain in the late 1950s, it doesn't quite add up. But it was a real cause célèbre. People had not seen anything quite like the Quatermass Experiment. And that, of all of them, is the most horrific of the Quatermass films. This is about a man whose body is invaded by an alien presence. He's a possession film.
I'm very excited, Kev. I have to confess, I have not yet seen any of the Quatermass films or TV shows. I've bought them all. I've got them all ready to watch in the next couple of weeks, but I've never dipped my toe into the Quatermass world yet. So.
You have got such a treat coming, especially the film version of Quatermass and the Pit, which is one of my favourite films of all time. Absolutely. Because Hammer, as I'm sure everybody knows, Hammer made adaptations of all 3 of the original Quatermass serials. And Quatermass and the Pit, what a wonderful, wonderful film. Again, one of those, a bit like 2001. There was a lot of this going on around the time, 1968. We've got Planet of the Apes, which is about evolution.
Yeah.
We've got 2001, which is in part about evolution.
Yeah.
And Quatermass and the Pit, which is kind of about evolution. It's about, again, Martians, these Martian grasshoppers that came to Earth, millions of years ago and altered the course of the human race and its development. Something was very much in the air in 1968. You got this trilogy of 3 remarkable films, which some clever person out there, please go program that on a triple bill somewhere, because they complement each other so well.
Yes, and I was a little bit confused when I was ordering the DVDs, because I kind of didn't realise that there was like a trilogy of TV series and a trilogy of films from Hammer. Some of the episodes are kind of lost, right, from the original series.
Right.
You can't actually watch them all now, which is a shame.
Sadly, the original Quatermass Experiment is mostly missing.
Yes.
Sadly, this is part of that cultural vandalism that the BBC engaged in at the time of reusing the tapes and wiping over things. And so, it's sad that we can't see them all, but we have got the Hammer film to watch.
And so, you had Quatermass, which was a big TV hit in the 50s, and then, of course, like you've already mentioned, a little show called Doctor Who came along, right, in the 1960s. You were a fan of Doctor Who, I take it, growing up?
No. I was obsessed with Doctor Who. I'm way beyond anything to do with fan. If it won't do any good on a podcast, but if I turned my camera around, you would see a shelf over here to my right full of Doctor Who toys.
Wow.
I'm 59 years old this year, and I've got a shelf full of Doctor Who toys. It never, ever, ever leaves you. It never goes away. I could talk for weeks about Doctor Who and its importance, and it was that programme that introduced so many people like me to science fiction.
Yeah.
Without that, we wouldn't be reading and watching this stuff, because it was there week in, week out. Back in the day, now when you're lucky if you get 12 episodes a year. Back in the day, it was on the majority of the year. It was only off for about 7 or 8 weeks a year.
Great. Yeah,
every week in, week out, this strange old bloke and his young friends would take us off on these fantastic adventures. And we were little, we didn't notice the wobbly sets, we didn't notice how bad the effects were, we didn't care. And in fact, my very first awakening of horror was thanks to Doctor Who.
Yes.
It was when the Cybermen came out of their tombs in the Tomb of the Cybermen.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. The bit that got me was, bear with me, I'm going to indulge.
Yeah, please.
I was sitting watching it, and all the Cybermen come out, and there's this strange music accompanying them, and it was scary in itself. And then the Cyber leader comes out. Huge, silver, domed head, and the dome is transparent, so you can see his brain underneath. Wow. And I'm about 4 or 5 years old at this point, right? I'm very young, so this was fantastically impressionable age. And the cyber leader comes over and starts having a go at the Doctor and all these, all the other people around him, and starts saying that, they're going to be like They're going to make them like them. And Jamie, the companion, shouts at him, "We're not like you." And honest to God, the episode ends with this Cyberman, with this horrible flat electronic voice, staring right down the camera. So obviously at that age, I thought he was talking to me.
Yeah.
Looking right down the camera, he says, "You will be."
Oh, God.
And I screamed. I was inconsolable. I was terrified. I didn't want to be like that. And my mum, bless her, my mum didn't make many mistakes in bringing us up. The one big mistake she made was rushing into the room saying, "What's going on here?" Me explaining it, and her saying the fateful words, "If this is what it does to you, you're not watching this anymore."
Oh,
and
no.
I screamed even louder because I was terrified, but I couldn't not come back and find out.
Yes.
You know, and that, I think, was the birth of my love of horror as well as
so
science
interesting,
fiction.
isn't it? Yeah, and that's it. It's such an important show, especially for, I reckon, particularly for your generation, although it's cross-generational, but that introduction to both sci-fi and to horror. I mean, how many generations of kids, you know, have stories like yours, right? Of being terrified by the Daleks, by the Cybermen, you know, whatever else.
But that famous phrase that sort of became slightly overused over time about hiding behind the sofa to watch it, you know, people sort of take the mickey out of that, but it was kind of true. We may not have been behind the sofa, but we were certainly hiding behind cushions or hiding behind mum and dad to watch it because we were terrified by it. Back then, it was a really properly scary programme, partly because we'd never seen anything like it before.
Yeah,
you know, my generation had not seen anything that was as scary as Doctor Who, so this was a huge introduction to a massive world that shaped my entire life. To be honest, you know, I am where I am today because of Doctor Who.
I've got to ask you before we move on from Doctor Who, what's your favourite era, favourite Doctor?
There is only one Doctor. He or she has had 13 faces, but there is only one Doctor. That's the cop-out answer, all right? That's the cop-out answer. The real answer is that we all agree Tom Baker was the best.
Right, okay, yeah.
But my favourite was John Pertwee. There was an old saying for a while that the Doctor you got when you were 8 is the one that meant the most to you.
Right,
and John Pertwee arrived when I was 8. And I always wanted to be John Pertwee. There was only him and Jimi Hendrix who could carry off that shirt. And I just thought, that's just the coolest look in the world. You know, that was just great. But Tom Baker's the best. But we all have our favourites. And, you know, John Pertwee was mine.
I love it. We talked a little bit about how all of these, you know, aged in a way where they look a little bit hokey now, the alien designs, the flying saucers, whatever. Is it fair to say that I think 2001 is a bit of a turning point where it feels a bit like, in cinema at least, space is really kind of taken seriously in that film in a way maybe we hadn't quite seen before at that point?
Yes, I think you're right. And I also think it's a very scary film.
Yeah.
It is my favourite film of all time, mainly because it's still got me thinking about it. You know, decades after I first saw it, I still don't understand it.
Yeah,
and that's what I love about it. Every time I go back to it, there's something new that I hadn't noticed before. There's another thought that occurs. Yeah, it sort of presented space as being really desolate.
Yes.
You know, before, you know, people had gone into space like Flash Gordon. They'd gone up on their spaceships with their sort of sparklers out the back, and it was all really exciting and sort of leaping about. In 2001, it was empty and silent and desolate. And then when you get out there, there's something bigger than us that's going to do something to you completely inexplicable.
Yeah, that's it.
And to this day, we still really don't know what those aliens were trying to do. We know they were trying to bump us up the evolutionary ladder, but to what end? Who knows, you know?
Yeah, there's something about Stanley Kubrick. I've talked about this before, but I do think he is one of the scariest directors. I think even when he's not doing horror, there's something of... even when he's doing comedy, Dr. Strangelove is quite scary. Like, there's something about all of his films that feel like we're all doomed, you know? That's like
there's a kind of iciness to the way he worked, a coldness, which I love. You know, he is my favourite director, and I love that sort of coldness. It's almost like he's detached. He's like the scientist sort of studying a bug under a microscope. You know, he's sort of interested but not engaged.
That's right.
And he's very much like the aliens in 2001. I think perhaps of all the characters, in inverted commas, in his films, the aliens, which we never see in 2001, are probably the closest to Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. They were the ones that were standing back, observing the human race, deeply interested, but not really wanting to get engaged. And I love that. I love that about his film. And I love that in particular about 2001. Marvellous film.
And 2001 does straddle both kind of science fiction horror and then, like you said, also cosmic horror as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, it feels like, particularly in that last act, it gets incredibly cosmic, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. And, if you watch it again, it's not always immediately obvious, but you can hear the aliens. When he's in the hotel room, you hear these strange noises, which you realise, maybe not on first viewing, but certainly sort of second or third viewing, you realise they're voices.
Yes.
But you can't hear what they're saying. So there's clearly something operating outside of our realm of experience, outside of the physical reality that Bowman finds himself in.
Yes.
And again, they're observing, they're watching, and they're manipulating him and his life. And it's just, incredibly creepy.
It is. I've never been so scared by looking at an obelisk, sticking out of the ground.
Yes.
It's really very creepy.
And that whole Stargate sequence, where you keep cutting back to his eyes and that sort of terrified eye that, the trauma he's going through, experiencing. We're watching it and thinking, wow, man, this is far out, if you were a hippie.
Oh my God, the amount of stoners that must have enjoyed that film in the early 70s.
It's been said several times that it was kind of a hit when it first opened. It was only when they reissued it with the tagline, The Ultimate Trip, and all the hippies turned up lying on the floor at the front of the cinema getting absolutely off their head while watching the Stargate, and that's when it became the big cult movie, you know? But that whole Stargate sequence, the hotel room, terrifying in that way that anything that is inexplicable is terrifying. We've talked about this before, about sort of things being uncanny and inexplicable. We can't. It's what we don't understand that frightens us the most. And I've never understood 2001, no matter how brilliant it is. I have my ideas of what it might be about.
Yes,
but no one really knows. And that's what I think makes it so scary.
That's it. And then, of course, off the back of the 1960s. And this isn't just sci-fi, this isn't just horror, this is cinema in general, American cinema in general. In the 1970s became incredibly bleak, incredibly nihilistic. Suddenly the villains, the monsters weren't out there, they were in here. There was this feeling of paranoia, conspiracy, of distrust of government. Obviously Vietnam, Watergate, all these other things kind of contributed to that. I will never forget when I was a kid seeing the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I walked downstairs. I was very young. I was probably about 4 or 5. I walked downstairs when I should have been in bed, and my parents were up watching this film on TV. And I happened to walk into the living room at that final moment in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where I just saw this horrific-looking moustached man pointing at me and screaming. And horrible. That image just haunted my nightmares for years. And I didn't even know what that movie was for so many years until I eventually saw it, when I was much, much older, and I realised, oh my God, this is the movie that stopped me from sleeping for about 2 weeks when I was a child.
What was seen as an absolute downer of an ending in the 1950s and had to be modified to have this softened ending, all of a sudden it had become de rigueur to have these downbeat, terrifying endings, where there were bleak endings, where there was no hope for any of us. It was a different decade. It was amazing in that 20 years how, particularly in America and in Hollywood, how things had changed so much, to go from that kind of optimism that we can defeat everything to this sort of hopelessness in the 1970s. Star Wars readdressed that a little bit. That brought back the hope and the sort of,
absolutely, that kind of old-fashionedness.
The old-fashionedness, But prior to that, and certainly just afterwards, because, Invasion of the Body Snatchers came afterwards, but around that period, it was a really negative, downbeat experience. And I've got to say, I love that, because it's
the best era of cinema. It's my favourite.
Oh, without a doubt, of any genre.
Yeah.
The 1970s, any genre. Yeah,
but you're right. I mean, everything in every genre, right? This sort of early 70s, everything from sort of Dirty Harry to, whatever. Yes. They're all these kind of like quite gritty, hot, bleak kind of movies, aren't they? Yeah, really.
Oh, yeah. they were kind of relentless. I mean, they just beat you over the head with all this negativity.
Yeah.
But that was a sign of the times. And again, science fiction in general became a little bit more like that. And again, it was, reflecting what was going on around the writers and filmmakers. They weren't writing about the future. They were writing about the 1970s, just disguising it as the future.
Exactly. And, movies were bleak, but they were also doing such a good job of taking this previously quite campy subject matter really seriously, right? Playing it dead straight and absolutely terrifying. And this all culminated in 1979 with arguably the scariest movie in this subgenre, of course, Ridley Scott's Alien.
Oh, God!
No, no, don't touch it! Don't touch it!
It is a classic haunted house story. You've got a group of people trapped in a location they can't get out of, and there's something coming to get them.
Yes.
Just so happens that this location is a spaceship, and the thing that's coming to get them is simultaneously the most beautiful and most repellent alien ever created.
Yeah.
It is a gorgeous piece of engineering by H.R. Giger. I'm somewhere knocking around here. It's sitting up there. In fact, I've got an alien from the film.
Oh, wow.
I can just sit and look at it from any angle, and it's beautiful.
It is
absolutely stunning.
What is it about that design? It is, I think, one of the scariest alien designs ever in cinema. And there's something about it that it reminds us of us. It reminds us of bugs. It reminds us of genitalia. Right? There are so many associations with it that I think freak us out.
It's absolutely.
Humans,
I mean, it is that sort of the phallic tongue.
Yes.
And that is in itself terrifying. One of the things that always startles me when I see it, because I keep forgetting until I see it again, it hasn't got any eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And that in itself, how does it know where we are?
And there are different kind of incarnations of it, aren't there? But for me, the scariest part is the face hugger. I think the things that hatch from the eggs and sort of scuttle around, leap at your face and attach themselves to you and then impregnate you down your throat. I think it's the scariest thing I've ever seen.
The very thought that we matter so little to these things,
we're just
we're
vessels.
just carriers. We're just something to plant the egg in. But the design of the face hugger is stunning. As human beings, we all have fears of certain things. We all have phobias. Mine is mice and rats. I don't like rodents of any kind. So what do? They give it a rodent's tail.
Yes, they do.
People don't like spiders. So what do? They give it the body of the biggest bloody spider you've ever seen in your life. And this is a spider that's going to jump on your face.
Yeah.
And so the design of that is perfect. You've got the rat's tail, the spider's legs.
It's
kind
amazing.
of insectoid a little bit.
It is.
It's slimy. It's everything we've been programmed by evolution and by society to fear.
It's like they call it a perfect organism, don't they? And it's like the perfect horror. It's the perfect horror organism, isn't it? It is the absolute stuff of nightmares to us.
And it's one of the few monsters that has really sort of survived the transition to CGI. It still works as a CGI monster. Yes. I prefer the physical ones in the first two films, and the third one as well to a lesser degree. But I do think it still works. It's just something about the design of it. It's like you say, it looks like us, but it really doesn't. And it's got bits that look like us, but they're in the wrong place.
Yes.
I mean, that thing should not be coming out of anything's mouth.
Yes.
That tongue should not. That's and then have another one inside that. That's just all kinds of wrong. And it's just brilliant the way they deploy that particularly in the first film.
It really takes its time in the first film as well,
it does,
doesn't it? Before we even get to the aliens. But you're right. I mean, there's something about it that ticks so many boxes for audiences. You can see why everyone loved it because you said, it's a haunted house movie. It's science fiction lovers are going to love it. Yep. Even slasher. I think it to me feels a bit like a slasher. Like you've got bodies being picked off one by one until you get a final girl at the end.
Yeah.
And
body count film, exactly what it is. Yeah,
it kind of came at the perfect time, didn't it? A couple of years after Halloween, but also all of this other stuff. It was another kind of perfect creation, perfect organism. That film,
and it was a nice little antidote to Star Wars and Close Encounters, which had been much more of the optimism school of science fiction. And then, along comes Alien and says, nope, it's still bloody scary out there. Don't get sucked in by all this nonsense. Aliens are still really nasty.
Yeah.
And they are still going to come and get you. And this time they're not interested in your women. They're interested in your body.
Yes.
And they're not interested in your body in any sexual way. They just want something to dump their egg in and then go away. And it's like... Oh, horrific. Really nasty stuff.
And of course, we talked about a lot of alien invasion movies set on Earth, but I think movies set in space have the added danger element as well. It's like, oh, by the way, you're in danger inside because there's a horrible, monstrous alien, and then outside is the vacuum of space where you're going to die as well. There's
nowhere to run.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to run. We often talk about characters in haunted house films. Why don't they just leave?
Yes.
The crew of the Nostromo didn't really have that choice. Even their escape pod didn't actually have enough room for all of them.
Exactly.
So there was nowhere to run. You are absolutely trapped. You're trapped inside a machine which is in itself quite alien.
Mm-hmm.
You're trapped inside this, at the mercy of a computer.
Yeah.
Which is cold and unthinking. You've got a robot amongst you who doesn't give a flying toss about you or whether you survive, know. And where do you go? You don't. You just run and hope for the best, you know. And it's absolutely terrifying.
And of course, something that a lot of the especially the sequels, the legacy of this film, but it is a theme that runs throughout, that actually maybe the humans are worse than the aliens, right? That actually there's the company behind it, the corporation, know. And I think that's something that really gets played up as those movies progress.
For me, it gets played up a little bit too much. I quite liked it it's not really mentioned in the first film so much. I mean, sort of Ash does talk about wanting to return it. It becomes more of a thing in Aliens.
Yes.
Where we actually see this sort of horrible venal company at work.
Yeah.
After that, it's like the aliens almost become, particularly in the Prometheus films, they almost become a sort of co-star in their own film.
Yeah.
It's like...
I'm very confused by the prequels, And
well, it's that curse, isn't it, of Hollywood, of having to explain it all to us, having to explain things to us that don't need explaining. When I first saw Alien, I saw that the space jockey, which looked like an elephant.
It did.
And I thought, that is scary. And I didn't need to know where it came from.
Yeah.
I just needed to know that it was there and it was scary. And then later on, they just, it becomes this race of very tall bald blokes with anger issues.
Very
and
weird.
It's like, all of a sudden, I'm just not as scared by them as I was by this horrible creature, which could have been an elephant, it could have been a fossil, we didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And that was terrifying. Now it's just like, oh yeah, tall shouty men, great.
Yeah, clearly Ridley Scott, I think, is more interested in this other stuff than he is the aliens, right?
Yeah.
He's got that kind of... It feels more Blade Runner in a way to me than Alien, because he's really interested in the androids, in what makes us human, in free will, and all of that kind of thing, isn't it?
Which is great, which is fine, but go away and make some more films like that.
Yeah.
Go and do that. Don't try and force that into a series when it doesn't fit.
Yeah,
it doesn't fit. The Alien films, the first two, after that I kind of lose interest, but the first two are terrifying simply because the aliens are so unstoppable and unknowable. They're wonderful. The more we know about them, the less scary they become. We get to the point in Alien Resurrection where, the scariest monster in cinema history is kind of reduced to this sort of mewling freak who wants a hug from his mummy. And he's like, really? How did we go from that? It's so disappointing the way that series went. It really is.
It is. It's very strange, isn't it? But I do love Aliens. James
I
Cameron's
love
Aliens.
Aliens.
Fun.
I must admit, when I first saw Aliens, I thought, this is rubbish, because it wasn't Alien.
Yeah,
but over the years, I've realised that, yes, it's a very, very different film using the same things, and it is brilliant, it is fantastic. But my first reaction was not to like it.
Still has some genuinely terrifying moments in Aliens as well.
Yeah.
Really
There's
scary.
That wonderful bit, it's a very quiet bit, where they're in the room, and they've got the motion trackers, and they're trying to figure out and everybody just stops and slowly looks up.
Yes.
As it dawns on that they're in the roof. And there's a wonderful moment in the unmade Alien 3. There was a script by William Gibson, who's one of my favourite writers. And there's a couple of wonderful moments in that which sort of tie into that sort of paranoia thing that we had in the room. One of them was when they're sort of they're on a space station. They're trying to get away from these aliens that have invaded, and they run into a room, lock themselves in, and then they look around. There's blood all over the walls, and then they notice the cots. They're in the nursery, and the aliens have been there.
Oh my God.
And there's another scene later on where Bishop is running across an abandoned shopping mall, and he hears a noise, and he stops and looks up, and the alien queen is asleep above him.
Oh my God.
And he has to get out without waking her up. And those moments of paranoia, they're in the first two films so much.
Yeah, I love
And they're
that.
not in the later films,
I
you
know.
know?
Well, and actually, you know, a lot of people are of the opinion that after part 2, that you're better off going to other mediums for better alien stories. There's an audiobook that people love.
Yeah.
There's the game, the Alien Isolation video game.
That's
which is the
right.
most terrifying video game.
Absolutely.
You know, so yeah, I think it's a shame that they've not been able to recapture that on film again, really, that fear, you know.
It was lightning in a bottle, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of happened twice. They got lucky, and then after that... And, you know, whenever I hear them say there's another Alien film coming, I just think...
I know, here we go.
Another one.
Another Michael Fassbender blowing into a flute or something.
Yes.
So what's going to happen here? And then, of course, I've got to briefly ask you about, speaking of incredible alien designs, a couple of years after Alien, we had John Carpenter's The Thing, which, again, it's like, I mean, literally indescribable, isn't it? But there's a film whose, I think, reputation, right, has just gone better and better and better and better. You know, now considered pretty much one of the greatest movies ever made, I think, by horror fans. You know,
and of course, I should have mentioned the original film when I was reading off all those 50s classics. I can now hear an echo of all those people listening to The Thing from Another World, you bloody idiot! Why are you not mentioning it? But yeah, I mean, these were a classic paranoia.
Yes.
Science fiction horrors.
Yes.
You know, it's like you don't know who you are. It's against that loss of identity thing, you know, that lock. And for that reason, I think Blade Runner is a horror film.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a film about not knowing who you are. And The Thing is the ultimate in that. You know, that you don't know who anybody else is. You're not entirely sure that they know that they're the Thing at the moment, you know, because they carry on as if nothing's happening.
Yeah.
It's like, do they even realise that they're the Thing?
Yes.
You know, who knows? But yeah, an absolutely marvellous film. As you say, at the time, not well liked. Because it had that downer of an ending. We're into the 80s now. The 70s sort of downbeat ending had given way to the 80s where everything was, you know, sort of a bit brighter and poppier and everything was great. And, you know, it's all got to have happy endings. And this was the least happy ending ever.
Yes.
No matter what those poor blokes did at the end of The Thing, they were going to get it wrong.
Incredible.
They were going to get it wrong. You know, it's going to be a disaster whichever direction they took. And it's so bleak, but so brilliant.
Probably the best practical effects, right, ever as well, that film, you know.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And the best joke about a practical effect as well. That wonderful bit where the head comes off and grows legs, goes out the door. And that one guy just looks at it. He says exactly what everybody in the audience is thinking. You've got to be fucking kidding. Everybody in the audience is thinking the exact same thing. And it's a wonderful moment of release because we're all sort of laughing at it because we're thinking, yeah, you've got to be fucking kidding. That's exactly what we thought when we saw that. It's
That's
so
right.
clever.
You just can't believe what you're seeing, can you?
Can't believe what you see.
But you're right. I think something happened in the 80s where aliens, and it's probably due to another major alien film that came out the same year as The Thing, right, called E.T., where suddenly maybe aliens had become a little bit more family-friendly again, hadn't they, I think?
Yeah, I'm not a great fan of E.T., I must admit. It's a bit too...
So schmaltzy, isn't it?
It's too manipulative. I mean, I don't mind having a cry over film. I've been known to cry over... I cry over 2001 and Blade Runner, but then that's me, isn't it? I mean, you know, I wouldn't expect everybody else to. But I don't mind that. It's just I always get the feeling with E.T. that I'm being told, cry now, this is the bit where you need to cry at it. And Spielberg had proved that he could do scary aliens because everybody thinks Close Encounters of the Third Kind, positive, uplifting film, and he is at the end. But for the first half of it, those aliens are bastards.
That's a great film, yeah.
They're flying around, switching the lights on and off, abducting little children. I mean, they're really quite nasty at the beginning of the film. It's only at the end when we realise, actually, we never get an apology from them for their appalling behaviour. They really should have been cancelled a long time ago, those aliens. Their behaviour was reprehensible at the start of the film. So he could do scary, he could do unnerving, but E.T., it was just a bit, and like you say, it became kind of the dominant. There were hostile aliens still to be found in cinema, but Everybody wanted E.T., everybody wanted cuddly, everybody wanted something they could market as a toy to.
That's
to
it.
The kids,
and it does feel a bit like when looking ahead at the films I'm exploring from the 80s, it goes back to that almost 50s sort of B-movie. They almost have a B-movie feel. So whether it's Critters, Killer Clowns, Extra, Life Force, these movies, that you feel a little bit like they were sort of direct-to-video almost, like
Indeed, and a lot of them were direct-to-video, of course.
Yeah.
And some of them are great. I mean, again, Life Force is one of those films like Plan 9 from Outer Space. I know in the heart of my heart it's awful.
Yeah.
But I love it. I just can't stop watching it. It's a great film, even though it's appalling.
And there's a lot of love for Chuck Russell's The Blob remake as well. Right?
Absolutely. It's one of those remakes that's far better than the original. I think the original is just a B movie, and I'm not a big fan of it, but I think the remake is so much better.
Yeah.
It's properly scary, the remake, whereas the first one is a bit of kind of, rock and roll era fun.
That's right, yeah. And I think, when you look at alien stuff from the 80s and into the 90s, it kind of does have a bit of that feel, right? Kind of rock and roll fun, kind of silly, slightly goofy, really great, some of them, but they don't quite have that earnestness maybe of Body Snatchers or Alien. And of course, we move into the 90s and we get sort of kids, lots of famous kind of family movies, again, based around aliens, whether it's Men in Black or Mars Attacks or whatever. But there was, I guess, one major tentpole in the 90s that I think really took aliens and UFOs seriously, to the point where apparently it even encouraged more people to believe in aliens and UFOs. And that was, of course, The X-Files. Were you a Mulder and Scully fan at the time, Kev?
Up to a point.
Yeah.
Up to a point. I think they kind of lost it after all. I think the first 4 or 5 seasons, absolutely loved them. Mm-hmm. It became very, very apparent very early on they were making this up as they went along. There was no great master plan, and they were contradicting themselves, and it was being dragged out. And then finally, when we found out what it was like, oh, was that it?
Right, yeah.
And then we had all the stuff about super soldiers, which I can't even remember what that actually led to in the end. But
I don't know, yeah.
But when it was good, it was fantastic. And I have watched the first couple of seasons again very recently, and it was, at the time, it was amazing. And again, that sort of, we didn't know who these aliens were. We didn't know where they were coming from. We didn't know what they really wanted. We knew that there were some really horrible human beings in cahoots with them.
Yes.
But we didn't really know what the overall plan was. When it was doing that, it was brilliant. But again, the more we found out, the less scary it became.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, every subgenre we talk about, it always feels like I say this, but there wasn't much else going on in the 90s. But The X-Files was this huge cultural thing. But scary kind of horrific aliens in movies did start to come back at the turn of the millennium, right? And of course, I feel like as with every single series, as with every single subgenre, you can't really talk about 2000s horror without talking about 9/11, and it did feel as though we had a huge wave of horror movies that came out in the wake of 9/11, particularly alien movies, alien invasion movies about attacks on American soil.
And of course, as well, there's the great panic that everybody has now forgotten, which just preceded 9/11, which was the Y2K.
Of course,
the whole millennial angst thing that was going on. So that all plays into that as well. Science fiction really thrives, particularly in the cinema, in times of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, we were approaching the millennium. Then we had 9/11. The whole world was tipped upside down. Mm-hmm. And science fiction, as it always does, came rushing in to offer this escape valve for us.
Yes.
In the Spielberg War of the Worlds, again, I like that film. There are problems with it, but it's not like the novel, but I do still like it.
The first half, particularly when the aliens are coming out of the ground and attacking the streets, like it is very good. Spielberg actually is very good at horror when he wants to be, I think.
Oh, he's a very good horror director, and of course, tripods. I mean, I will love it forever just for having tripods at last. We finally got the proper tripods in it. But there's a line of dialogue in there, isn't it? When he's carrying the kids out of the house after the planes crashed outside. And there's this telling little line where he's saying to his daughter, "Don't look." And she said, "Is it terrorists?"
Yes.
That even as early as that, kids were thinking that anything bad was terrorists. And
I think it really was like, I hear about the generations before me who were all scared of the atomic bomb dropping on them and, practicing hiding under your desks at school or whatever. I definitely remember there was a feeling of constant threat of terrorism when I was growing up in that same regard. You never knew who was going to be strapped to a bomb maybe on the bus you were on or something like that. It's
and that's what happened. Like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, when I was around in the 70s and 80s in particular, the threat of the bomb was the big one. Yes. And then it kind of went away when we got the whole sort of détente thing came in, and sort of, the world seemed a safer place, and then suddenly it wasn't again. Yeah. And so this threat of terrorism became the new... And so you had the aliens in sort of post-millennial science fiction horror films are the terrorists.
Yes, exactly.
It's the exact same propaganda, whereas once they were, in British films, they were the Germans coming to invade us. Then in American films, they were the Russians and the communists coming to get our women and whatever. Mm-hmm. Now it was the terrorists. That's what they are. It was shorthand. We all knew what it meant. We all knew what those aliens were meant to be. They weren't from outer space at all,
There's something of that in even in M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, actually, which it gets very silly, but I actually quite like, again, the sort of setup of that, and it's much more sort of creepy and intimate and small, and the cornfields and the crop circles and everything. I think some of that film is very powerful in that regard,
I like some of the individual moments in Signs, but I can never quite get past the fact how monumentally, cosmically stupid the aliens are. They're allergic to water, so they come to a planet which is 8/10 water. I mean... What?
The ending let it down, didn't
it? How insane does this alien... if that's the best the aliens have got, we've got nothing to worry about, because they are monumentally stupid.
There really isn't intelligent life out there.
No, not at all. No, not at all. But maybe that was the point, maybe that the life out there is no more clever than we are. That, we're not entirely clever as a species. Maybe that was his point, that they're just as dumb as we are.
There was a great sort of social sort of alien film which I thought worked really well, which was District 9, about sort of South African apartheid and that kind of thing. Indeed. Very clever. I thought that was very on the nose, but very good, right?
Yeah, not subtle. No. Not subtle, but brilliantly done. And again, a great example of science fiction as allegory. Yeah. We can't really make a film too much about the horrors of apartheid because no one will come and see it because it's too horrific. It was such a horrible, horrible period. The things that were done were just awful. Would people sit and watch this as entertainment? So I'll tell you what, we'll just dress it up as aliens. Yeah. And so it's telling the same story. Yeah. And getting the same point across, but doing it in, using science fiction as a vehicle to do that, which is why science fiction is so great. It's so open to all that kind of metaphor. It's wonderful.
Do you think, and this is something I know I've asked you before about things like zombies and occultists or whatever, but do you think that, are we still as scared by aliens and UFOs as we were, for example, in the 50s and 60s, do you think?
I think we are. Yeah. I think we are. I think, again, that thing, just go and have a look at the night sky and try not to feel that sort of the weight of the cosmos falling on you. Yeah. That in itself is actually quite unnerving, quite unsettling. So yeah, I think as long as we don't know what's out there, and we don't know what its intentions are towards us, there will always be, at the very least, suspicious of them. And that suspicion then becomes paranoia, which then becomes fear. So, I think we still are, I think,
There's bound to be some sort of COVID-19-esque alien virus film or something, isn't there?
COVID-19 will, I'm sure the Asylum are working on this right now, that the COVID-19 will be an alien weapon that's used to sort of, try and subjugate the masses. But if they're not, Asylum, you want to give me a call? We can do business here, I think, yeah,
exactly. Before we wrap up, I want to talk briefly about the 2010s and what feels like a bit of a return to the sort of Lovecraftian cosmic horror, I suppose, more than anything else. But two of my favourite filmmakers that have made, I think, some of the most interesting horror, sci-fi, sort of cosmic movies of the last decade are Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson.
Yes.
With movies like Resolution and The Endless.
There's something out here, isn't there?
How is that possible? You want to know what it is that runs all this. You go find it.
Kev, are you a fan of Benson and Moorhead's work?
Very much so. They're two of my favourite contemporary filmmakers. They are astonishingly good. I love the way they've created this low-key shared universe.
Yes.
It's not big and brash like the comics-based ones are, but, you know, everything. There's a through thread from Resolution to Spring to The Endless. Someone in The Endless talked about Ethan having gone off to Italy and disappeared, so that's not back to Spring. Resolution, of course, is just one of the loops that is in The Endless.
Wonderful.
And, you know, even Synchronic, you can see people carrying banners and wearing badges and sigils that were seen earlier in the film. They created this fantastic shared universe. It's almost like a Lovecraftian mythos of their own.
Yes, it is.
You know, they probably couldn't get the rights to do Cthulhu and Dagon and all the rest of them, so we'll start our own.
It's wonderful, isn't it? And it really is. It's cosmic and Lovecraftian in the way that it kind of almost hurts your brain trying to get your head around some of the ideas in it, particularly Resolution and The Endless. I think it's just wonderful to just rewatch and explore and think about and talk about. You know, it's brilliant. Yeah.
And the thing I love the most about them is that we still haven't seen the aliens yet.
No, I know.
We still don't know who they are. We don't know who's behind any of these. 4 films in, 4 brilliant films which work fantastically on their own.
Yes. Yeah.
And we still don't know what the overall big picture is.
Yeah.
Which suggests that we've got plenty more to come. And, please God, let that be. You know, we need people like these guys. They're amazing. Really, really clever, thoughtful filmmakers who clearly know their stuff. They've clearly read Lovecraft. They know about the history of cosmic horror, but they're doing a new twist on it. They said, right, that's Lovecraft. We don't have to go and adapt Lovecraft. We're going to do our own one.
Absolutely.
And so far, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, because it is a difficult thing, and I know that this is something that people have struggled with adaptations of Lovecraft, right? Is that, like you said, this idea that the horror is kind of indescribable, it's incomprehensible.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of put that on screen?
How do you put that on screen?
Suppose? It's quite tricky, isn't it?
And in a way, you know, Benson and Moorhead have kind of done that by not showing us. You know, they've hinted at what's there, just like Lovecraft did. You know, and they've had people talk about what's there, but we've not actually seen it yet. And I kind of hope we don't. I suppose the closest we came was the monster in Spring.
That's right.
So I suppose it's the closest we've come.
You get glimpses of something under the water in The Endless.
That's right.
But
yeah,
just glimpses.
Glimpses.
And they do very clever things, like, you know, with The Endless and Resolution. It's almost like, well, the camera is the monster that's watching them, right?
Yes.
And then you kind of go, well, the monster is like this godlike presence that is there. Yeah. Oh, actually, that's the filmmakers. Oh, actually, that's those two.
That's those two.
But it's like it's very clever. Like
They are very smart filmmakers. They really are. They're the kind of filmmakers who, to an old fart like me, every so often, someone like them or Mike Flanagan come along, and you just think, actually, it is worth still watching the new films. I don't have to keep watching 70s stuff all the time. I can actually watch the new ones, because there are still filmmakers who are doing remarkable things.
Yes. Yeah. What did you think of another good cosmic one from the last few years that I really enjoyed? Was Alex Garland's Annihilation. Did you check that one out? That was a good one.
I did. I liked that. I'm a big fan of Alex Garland. I'm a huge fan of his. And a very clever film. Really sort of lots of, again, with cosmic horror, the main thing is the big ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
And not providing big answers.
Yeah.
You know, and he does that brilliantly. At the end of the film, we're really no better off as to, you know, our knowledge of what's happened. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's exactly as it should be, because it's kind of unknowable.
Yeah, it is.
Just like in the Benson and Moorhead films, it's unknowable. We can't possibly, we haven't got the capacity to process mentally what goes on in these films. And so, why bother? Yeah. Whatever answer they're going to give us is going to disappoint us.
Yes, that's
so. They don't give one. Brilliant. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, it's much more frightening to think of something that we cannot understand or comprehend
something
or
that's
explain.
Just outside our grasp.
Yeah.
It's almost there. We've almost got our fingertips on it, and then it slips away again. Love that. Love that.
I love it. So there you go, Kev. I guess let's finish by me asking you, what's the future of alien cosmic horror? Is this going to be a subgenre that will continue to thrive, do you think?
I think cosmic horror is only just starting. I think that's definitely going to happen. I suspect we will see more Lovecraftian adaptations come along. I think that's
we had Colour Out of Space very recently.
Colour Out of Space, and I think he's I can't remember which one he's doing next, but he's going to, or was before. There were some unpleasant allegations, which I think has probably put paid to the next film. But there were plans to make another one. Hopefully, somebody else will pick that up. But yeah, I think, like I said earlier, science fiction become the mainstream now. So this is going to continue. And I think, for every shock that we have, like you said, there will be COVID-19 alien invasion films.
Yes.
There will be, whatever horrors await us in the next few years will be met by alien invasion films, which then seek to act as release valves for our fears and fantasies and paranoias. And they will continue. They'll always be here.
Love it. And final ridiculous question for you, Kev, is what's your favourite of this whole subgenre?
Alien. My favourite film is 2001, but if we're sticking strictly to sort of spacey monster, alien horror type stuff, it's Alien. You cannot beat. Alien is so ruthlessly efficient that it's hard to beat. It's a marvellous film that I can watch over and over and over again and never get tired of. So, Alien.
Did you know when you first saw it, did you know the chestburster scene was coming?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the problem, is that scene now has been spoilt for people.
I know. I would love to have not known it was coming, but because I was a nerd even then, I was reading magazines, I was reading Starlog and Starburst, and they gave it away. And I'd seen, there was a BAFTAs broadcast that year where they showed the bit with Dallas in the air ducts and the alien grabbing, and I wish I hadn't seen that, because that really made me jump at home.
Yeah.
But in the context of the greater film, that would have absolutely had me crapping myself if I didn't know that was coming. Yes. And I just wish I hadn't seen it. So it's one of the reasons these days I try to avoid trailers and reviews as much as possible, because I've learned my lesson over the years. But the chestburster, I knew it was coming. It was still horrible.
Yes.
It was still absolutely awful, and still one of the greatest horror ideas in horror cinema. Yeah.
Well, Kev, it's been an absolute joy as ever. Thank you so much for joining me. And just remind us, where can people find more of your work and more of your writing out there online?
You can find me at eofftv.com, which is my encyclopedia of fantastic film and television website. And I still wish I'd thought of a shorter name for it. I have got the EOFF TV review, which you can go and have a look at. Those reviews go up every day on that, because I've got no friends and I stay at home all the time watching films, so I might as well write reviews of them. So there's reviews going up all the time, including a lot of the films we talked about today, actually. There's reviews on there. And you can find me on Facebook, and you find me on Twitter. On Twitter, I'm at EOFFTV. But on Facebook, I've got a new account because I got chucked out of my old one. Thank you, Facebook.
Oh, no.
Yes, I got chucked out for being too young to have an account. I mean, seriously, they can't see me. Mike, explain this to them. Really, I'm 59, for God's sake, near enough.
I take that as a compliment, Kev.
I should have done, but I was really annoyed. But anyway, if you look up EOFFTV, we've got a group going on there as well. It's fairly new, but come along, say hello, and introduce yourselves and all the rest of it. It'd be great fun.
Brilliant. Kev, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike. It's been brilliant.
A big thank you to the amazing Kevin Lyons. I hope that's whetted everyone's appetites for what we've got to come over the next few months, because it certainly has mine. Now, in a minute, I'm going to be talking to Freudian cinephile Mary Wilde to see what she makes of this particular subgenre. But first, this.
500 years ago, a mystical box was created. The key that unlocked the door to absolute evil.
Oh my God.
From one generation to the next, the descendants of its creator have been cursed.
Kill them all.
Now, the evil must be stopped to close the gates of hell forever. Welcome to Oblivion. Hellraiser Bloodline.
Oh boy, that was a trailer you just heard there for Hellraiser 4 Bloodline. That is one of the many Hellraiser films that I am going to be discussing in our brand new Hellraiser mini-series over on Patreon. This is going to be available for $10 donors. We are going to be bringing you a 5-part mini-series in which we discuss every single Hellraiser sequel in depth. I'm kind of dreading it, but kind of excited at the same time. So I'm going to be joined every single episode by friend of the pod and Brainrot host Stevie Webb, as well as a whole bunch of other guests to discuss these movies. I think it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. So that is just one of the many things that we've got going on over on Patreon at the moment. It's been a quiet 3 months here on the main feed, but over on Patreon, it's been chock-a-block. I've been bringing Patreon subscribers there new episodes every single week. If you are a $5 donor, you'll have access to a whole bunch of bonus reviews, mailbag episodes, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Just recently, we've covered Pulse and Session 9 and Roadkill, which are all celebrating their 20th anniversaries. Mailbag episodes, we're doing a big poll of the greatest ever horror movies, the results of which will be in a special countdown episode later on in the summer. There's a whole bunch of other brilliant stuff available for $5 donors, but if you're a $10 donor, you'll also get access to our exclusive mini-seasons, including the Hellraiser season, which is just kicking off, a Hitchcock retrospective, which we're about midway through, and a Saw retrospective, which just finished, in which me and Rob Watts covered every single Saw movie. That's all 8 of them, and we finished, of course, by covering Spiral in spoilerific detail. Not only that, there are some other old mini-seasons available for $10 patrons. There's a Twin Peaks retrospective, and there's an Extreme Cinema mini-series with Brad and Zobo. So there's so much content out there. If you want to get involved and if you want to listen to all of this bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. $5 will give you a back catalogue of over 100 bonus episodes to listen to and regular content going forward. $10 will get you the whole back catalogue and weekly bonus episodes. So it's basically like a whole other second podcast that you can listen to in conjunction with this one. $20 will get you all of the above, but also make you an official Evolution of Horror sponsor, in which you'll get your own special segment in an episode here on the main feed. Everybody who signs up from the UK gets sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and everybody will also get a little shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, we're going to give everybody who signed up during our hiatus a very special thank you. Now, there are too many people to thank in just this one episode because I'll be listing names forever, so I'm going to split it into the next 2 or 3 episodes, but here is our first list of people to thank. So a big thank you to Patreon subscribers Ace, Katie Martin, Troy, Joanne Ragg, Dan Crane, Mary Willis, Kaki Winter, Carol Hovis, Matt Socia, Adam Robinson, Claire Hubbard, Patrick Barnes, Damon Haynes, M. Miglio, Dan Lehman Kennedy, Kelly Sawyer, Hannah, The That's, Everything Racing Podcast, Joe Oliver, Dan Harmon, Dave Coleman, TJ Matthews, Gemma McConingly, Matthew Cowell, Ryan Chisholm, Trayson Danos, David Chalmers, Mike Alsip, Nicole Knoll, Jessica Stevens, Bailey Carrar, and John Pope. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up, and if I haven't mentioned your name yet, then I will do in the next couple of weeks. We're just diluting the lists somewhat. One more time, if you want to join these guys, if you want to sign up and get treated to all of that bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's continue with the second part of this week's episode. It's time to chat to a very good, very long-time friend of the pod, Freudian cinephile herself, Mary Wilde. Now, for the first time ever on the podcast during our Mind and Body series, I had a regular contributor contributing to almost every single episode. Mary gave us her very special Wilde About Horror segment, in which she talked about her own perspectives and takes on that week's films. That went down so well that we are going to be doing more of those Wilde About Horror segments this series. But first of all, she's just dropping in to have a little chat so I can hear her views about this subgenre as a whole. So a very big welcome back to the podcast, Mary Wilde. Hello.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
How has kind of this sort of end of lockdown period been for you? Has it all been okay?
Yeah. I felt like a little bit more just kind of liberated being out of the flat. And like, I mean, even myself as an introvert, I never thought that even I could get cabin fever, but sure enough, it happened.
Oh my God. It's been a long winter, hasn't it? I'm glad for the summer now, I think. And
definitely.
To see some other human beings as well.
Yeah.
So tell me, so we're talking about, we're going from, that kind of very kind of internal kind of horror to something very external now, I suppose, in a lot of ways. We're going to be talking about aliens and space and the cosmos and all of that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on this subgenre, Mary? Are you a fan of this area of horror?
Oh, absolutely. I love science fiction more generally, but that kind of intersection of horror and this sci-fi, specifically focusing on the alien as a kind of object of horror, that is just, for sure, one of my favorite topics.
Oh, it's so cool, isn't it? Some of these movies I find really creepy, really scary. What do you think it is about aliens that kind of scares us so much and has done for so many decades?
Well, obviously coming from a psychoanalytic background, it's just been also in my research, because I've taught a few courses actually on sci-fi and psychoanalysis. And just, I guess, having thought about it a lot, I think that psychoanalysis shows that because of the unconscious, we are aliens to ourselves, that the biggest alien that we've maybe ever encountered is our own unconscious, that part of ourselves that is unknowable, and that it kind of tries, through different methods like dreams or symptomology or accidents or, slips of the tongue, parapraxis, that thing that tries to make itself known to us.
Yes.
And we're always so kind of baffled, maybe in an uncanny way, but sometimes also terrified by what we confront.
Yeah, it's the epitome of the unknown, isn't it? I suppose you're absolutely right. It's like almost the definition, I suppose, of an alien is something other, right? It's something that isn't us. There's something that's unfamiliar, that is different, that is unknowable. That in itself is always going to be quite a scary thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
And also, I suppose, compared to other monsters, there is a chance that aliens could be real, right? Mary, do you believe in aliens?
Oh, definitely. I always think of it, for sure. I do believe that aliens do exist. I'm not really committed to any one theory of what that might look like.
Yeah.
But I just think that, the cosmos is so vast, and there's even theoretical research suggesting that we're not even in a universe, we're in a multiverse. There may be thousands, maybe millions of other universes. And so if that's true, and we know that there's life on this planet, I just feel like it would be really weird if we were it. Like, it would just be unfathomable. Surely other conditions somewhere out there in the universe, beyond even our solar system, beyond our galaxy, surely other conditions must exist to give rise to intelligent life. Now, they may not look exactly like us. We may not even have the faculties evolved as a human species to even perceive what other life looks like, because we know that we only maybe perceive 4% of matter. So the possibilities are endless. And I find the thought of other beings out there really comforting. Like, it just fills me with curiosity and wonder.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's something I would find more frightening about the idea that we're the only thing in the universe, right? I mean, that is a scarier thought in a lot of ways, I think. Yeah, you're right. And it's really interesting. I mean, obviously there are hundreds of films out there about friendly aliens, but none of those we're interested in. We're going for the scary, hostile aliens. And, you know, we've got some incredible stuff to explore. And as with last series, you're going to be joining me throughout the series to give us your thoughts in your Wild About Horror segments, which I'm really excited about. Just looking at now at the sort of list of movies that we're covering, is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to sort of revisiting or checking out or exploring?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen your program and it is so exciting and well thought out. And it's just, I'm so, you know, again, stoked to be a part of it with the, you know, with the Wild About Horror segments. The one title that really inspires me maybe more than any other is probably They Live.
Masters! What do these things want, and why are they here?
You still don't get it, do you, boy?
They have recruited the rich and the powerful.
They're running the whole show.
Wake up! They're all about you, all around you.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Just because I feel like, I mean, there's philosopher Slavoj Žižek, you know, he has, he actually did a whole analysis of They Live for his Pervert's Guide to Ideology. Mm-hmm. And I will definitely base my interpretation on Žižek's, so I'm kind of following on from him. But I think the reason I love that so much is because it is kind of theoretically so rich and dense with meaning. And it's such an original take on the alienation that can happen in society because of injustice or because of corruption. And you know, that sense of alienation, kind of representing it not just as this like clearly defined form outside of us, but actually more of a kind of very uncanny, strange feeling inside, you know?
Yes.
So it's kind of taking that notion of otherness, that notion of the unknowable, or as you say in the horror spectrum, the thing that's frightening about aliens, and kind of neatly kind of locating that as the experiential reality. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and you're right. And there does seem to be sort of, these alien films seem to fall into one of two camps. There's the sort of War of the Worlds, or, you know, something where it's very much a kind of external force. These aliens look and sound like aliens, right, from outer space. But then there are movies a bit like They Live, a bit like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where they look like us, right? And that they could be anywhere. And it feels like much more, like you said, a kind of a threat from within, I suppose, right, rather than from the outside. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. It's a representation of how we might feel alienated as subjects, you know, within a certain economic system. Let's say, for example, in the case of They Live, that you know, merely certain trends or systems that we live with in civilization, that they produce an alienated feeling, and that is really scary.
And you know, the idea of space itself is scary too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to be looking at kind of more sort of cosmic horror as well, stuff like Event Horizon, for example, and those are scary stories as well, aren't they? Really, kind of that idea of kind of going out into the big unknown, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. That's another great kind of dimension of this topic, because it is, you know, I titled my my sci-fi course Science Fiction Cinema outer space as inner space.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And it's this whole thing about, you know, as you say, the vastness and the kind of unfathomable distances of the cosmos, and that's so dark, and it produces this kind of like, it conjures up an image of the void, you know, like this kind of this emptiness, this abyss out in space that we haven't explored, we haven't charted, we haven't come to grips with. And that is kind of amazing, you know, to think that there is this sublime vastness out there, but at the same time it's terrifying because we feel so small next to it. And that it could just kind of like, you know, I don't know, we feel so immersed in it as well. And I like the idea of this topic of aliens producing a kind of topographical study of horrific events taking place out deep in space, you know, and that it's this, we feel, you know, there's a comfort in knowing that, like, one side of the story says that there's people safely secured on planet Earth, you know, where everything is predictable and like, and feels safe. But then there's this other element where some people get like trapped or stranded or caught up, in a battle with aliens deep in space, in the event horizon, or in a black hole.
Yeah.
And I just love that topography. I mean, actually, Sigmund Freud, he was a big fan of mapping things out, like literally like architecture. So he loved almost like an infographic, showing the thresholds of conscious mind versus the unconscious mind. And so much of it looks like spatial drawings, showing sections and segments. And a lot of those theories, especially like his iceberg model of the mind or the hydraulic model of the mind that charts like the id, ego, superego, you could almost easily transfer that onto like spatial analysis of space, actual deep space. So I love that kind of compatibility.
And what's really fascinating, I think you get into such kind of unknown territory that even with sci-fi, we kind of veer away from science and into almost sort of mysticism or magic almost, because it's so far from what we know, I think, isn't it? That's the thing. And I think there's a really interesting balance in some of these movies too. Like Signs, for example, actually, of kind of science versus faith as well, and that kind of thing. And what does it mean about, is there a God, etc., if we're reaching the outer edges of the universe and the galaxy and all of that kind of thing. And I think those are some, again, quite big, scary existential themes that this subgenre covers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. Like it sort of shows the ambivalent nature of science. Being so rooted in, observable measures and scientific progress and advancement to be able to carry us into space. But then once you're there, you're faced with something you would have never expected. You never expected to see.
Yes.
A celestial event. And that kind of tests the limit of your own methodology, your own science. And suddenly it may be even terrifying to find out that maybe your whole worldview is just one small piece of the puzzle. There's all this other stuff that maybe, as you say, edges towards mysticism or magic or even divine, intervention or something.
Yes. Now, I want to ask you about some of the movies that we're going to be discussing. Obviously, we're going to hear your thoughts on some of the big movies like Alien, The Thing, Body Snatchers, but there are some other quite unusual ones that I know you were keen to discuss. One of the ones here that you are going to be giving us your thoughts on is Phantasm.
Yeah.
What is it about Phantasm that sort of piqued your interest?
Just the pure kind of like chaos of it. And to be honest, I feel like there's not enough opportunities to talk about those films, Yeah. And I just, as soon as I saw that you had it on there, that was on the top of my list that I had to, I wanted to tackle. I love the chaotic energy of it. Mm-hmm. I love the aesthetics of that film. I feel like it's kind of underrated or sometimes flies a little bit below the radar for people.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad you're going to be doing a deep dive on that one.
I'm really excited, actually. I've only seen the first one a long time ago, and I'm looking forward to sort of checking out the sequels as well. But I just remember it being so strange and sort of nightmarish, and nothing really makes any kind of logical sense or anything, does it? But yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's very surreal, and it's kind of like it's having fun with that energy as well, which I love. I love it when filmmakers are knowingly like accepting the absurdism of their film, but they don't try and dial it down, they amp it up to like 11, it's just, and I was lucky enough that I got to see the restored print of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think it was like a few years ago at the London Film Festival, and it is really breathtaking.
So there you go. I'm really excited. Is there, and let me finish by asking you, Mary, do you have a favorite movie in this subgenre? What's your favorite kind of alien sci-fi horror movie?
My all-time favorite, I have to say, would be Event Horizon.
Fantastic.
The Event Horizon was the culmination of a secret government project to create a spacecraft capable of faster-than-light flight. The ship doesn't really go faster than light. What it does is it creates a dimensional gateway that allows it to jump instantaneously from one point of the universe to another light years away.
Where's she been for the last 7 years, Doctor?
I mean, it's kind of surprising when we think that when it was first released, it didn't enjoy like a lot of box office success.
Yeah,
it had a lot of detractors, and yet over the years, it's grown a massive cult following.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because a lot of the times, you know, this is a sign of like a really pioneering movie, of something that when upon first confrontation, we feel really unsettled and we feel a bit like provoked, but in a maybe negative way. But that is a good thing. That's a sign of really good cinema, because it's supposed to take us out of that comfort zone, especially because of the genre that it's, you know, that it's in.
Yeah.
And anything to do with black holes in space and what might be going on in them, sign me up. I'm interested. I'm interested in engaging.
Yes, and it's an excellent choice. And you're so right about that. And it's funny how, you know, like you said, it wasn't very well received. So many of these films have that story behind them as well. And I think there's something of a sort of almost sort of bad or trashy reputation when it comes to sort of science fiction horror for whatever reason, you know, and I don't know whether that's maybe going back to, you know, the sort of 50s B-movie sort of vibe of a lot of these films, you know, or what, or if there's something that we just don't like to confront, or that for some reason we don't accept as kind of artistic, you know, as something like, for example, so many of the films we covered last series, which were much more kind of reputable, there's more sort of human horrors from people like Lynch or Cronenberg. These movies have kind of had a very different sort of critical reaction initially, didn't they? And that's really interesting. I think it's going to be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, for sure. And looking at that and examining, as you say, the reasons why can be really illuminating about the way that we react, you know, the various ways that we react in cinema. I think that sometimes in like cinematic communities or of fans, maybe like science fiction is sort of elevated, you know, which I think is like a kind of really apt word. It's elevated to like be thought of as and it's kind of like an epic, sublime experience.
Yeah.
Like Kubrick's film, you know, 2001 Space Odyssey. But I think that, you know, maybe the horror discourse or the horror landscape is a little bit more like, I don't know, there's something much more visceral there, not just cerebral, and it deals with like really uncomfortable emotions, and like it's very messy and chaotic.
Yes.
And so maybe the collision of those two things, something really elevated and sublime and like put on a pedestal and almost worshipped, you know, as a totem, to suddenly like clash that with that more chaotic energy of horror. People feel very uncomfortable upon initial viewing, maybe.
Yeah.
And they need to kind of reconcile those emotions. But I think the beauty of film is that it is enduring and sustained because of word of mouth, because of cinephiles just loving the cinematic experience and recommending and like growing these cult followings post release. And so I would say to any, you know, filmmakers that follow your podcast that want to make films in this intersection to just hang on, you know, don't be discouraged, follow your vision and have faith that your audience will find you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're so right about that. Well, I can't wait, Mary. It's going to be fun. I can't wait for you to join me on this journey through the cosmos that we're going to take over the next few months. It's going to be great.
Me too. I just have one question for you.
Yeah, go on.
Do you believe you've ever met an alien?
No, and I was going to ask you this as well, but no, I don't think so. And I'm very... I guess I'm quite skeptical, and I kind of just believe what I see in front of me, you know, in a way. So I don't believe I've ever encountered anything like that. Do you?
Well, I can guarantee you've met at least one.
Oh, have I?
Yeah, me.
Oh, that explains a lot. Well, Mary, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this subgenre. I'm really excited to hear more of your segments this series, and just remind us where people can find more of your work and your podcasts and everything else out there online.
Yeah, sure. If you're on Twitter or Instagram, my handle is the same, Psychstar, PSYCSTAR. On Twitter is where I'm more likely to announce upcoming courses that I do with the Freud Museum, or news about my podcast that I co-host with Sarah Cleaver, Projections Podcast. And actually, I will be announcing soon details of my own Patreon that I'm going to be doing.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm going to be uploading a whole series of 50 concepts in psychoanalysis and their corresponding films.
Oh, fantastic.
And yeah, so there'll be like mini lectures uploaded every week.
Oh, what a great idea. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to subscribe. That's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Mary, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's guests, Mary Wilde and Kevin Lyons. Oh, it's good to be back, isn't it? Let us know what you thought of this week's episode, and what are your thoughts on the Alien subgenre. Which movie are you most excited to hear discussed this series? Which movies have you never seen that you're going to be checking out for the first time? I would love to hear some of your thoughts. Email us, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can also find us on all the socials. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, etc., etc. We've got a whole bunch of merch as well. We've got Evolution of Horror hoodies, t-shirts, all sorts that are all available in our shop. You can check them out on our website, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. And you can find all previous episodes and seasons of this podcast on our website, evolutionofhorror.com. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms. If you get a chance, please do spare a minute to leave us a little rating or review if you haven't done so already on Apple Podcasts. We would be hugely grateful, as that really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, well, here we go. We are in it. Every single week from now until the end of the year, we'll be bringing you Alien movie discussions. And next week, for our first deep dive discussion, it's a biggie. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the one and only Kim Newman, making his second appearance on the podcast. His first was on the very, very, very first episode of this podcast 3.5 years ago. And he's back to discuss with me the original Alien Invasion text. Next week, it's going to be a War of the Worlds special. We are going to be deep diving a couple of films, but we are generally going to be talking about several different adaptations of War of the Worlds. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about the H.G. Wells novel. We are then going to talk about the Orson Welles radio play from the 1930s. We are then going to be talking about the 1953 movie. We're going to be talking about the Jeff Wayne concept album, and we're going to be talking about Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds from 2005. So next week, it's going to be the evolution of War of the Worlds. Absolutely cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.